Triple H just made a deal with Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins that fundamentally changes WWE's power structure, and what was discussed in that backstage meeting is going to enrage half the locker room while terrifying the other half. The Shield is officially back, but this isn't the Shield you remember from a decade ago. This is a new Shield operating under terms and conditions negotiated directly with WWE's chief content officer, with contractual protections and creative control that no other wrestlers in the company have. And the most infuriating part? Triple H basically handed Roman and Seth the keys to Monday Night Raw, giving them veto power over storylines, approval rights over who they work with, and guaranteed main event positioning that makes them untouchable regardless of what anyone else in the locker room accomplishes. When I reveal the exact terms of this alliance that were leaked from the meeting, when I show you which wrestlers are already planning to quit WWE because they know they'll never get fair opportunities with the Shield controlling everything, and when I explain why this backroom deal represents everything wrong with wrestling's old boys club mentality, you're going to question whether WWE under Triple H is any different from WWE under Vince McMahon. Let me start by revealing how this meeting even came together, because the circumstances that led to Triple H sitting down with Roman and Seth tell you everything you need to know about the desperation driving this alliance. After the Vision betrayed Seth Rollins and after Seth made that humiliating apology to Roman where he literally got on his knees and begged for forgiveness, WWE's internal analytics showed something that sent panic through the executive offices. Raw's ratings dropped by 18% in the key demographic. Social media engagement plummeted. Merchandise sales for non-Shield related products stagnated. And most concerning, WWE's internal polling showed that casual viewers were losing interest in Raw because they perceived the show as chaotic and directionless without a clear top star or faction to build around. Triple H called an emergency meeting with his creative team and the message was clear: Raw needs something big, something iconic, something that captures mainstream attention and brings lapsed fans back to the product. The obvious answer was the Shield. Roman Reigns is WWE's biggest star and draws consistently across all metrics. Seth Rollins, despite his recent struggles with the Vision storyline, still has tremendous fan support and is one of the most talented performers on the roster. Bringing them together as a reunited Shield creates instant nostalgia and interest from fans who remember the original faction's dominance. But Triple H knew that simply announcing the Shield is back wouldn't be enough. Roman and Seth needed to be convinced that this reunion would be different from their previous runs together, that they would have protections and guarantees that ensured WWE couldn't sabotage their partnership through bad creative or political maneuvering. Triple H needed Roman and Seth to believe in this reunion enough to fully commit to it, and that required offering them something unprecedented in WWE's modern structure: actual power over their own storylines and creative direction. The meeting took place in Triple H's private office at WWE headquarters, not at a live event venue. This wasn't a quick conversation in a guerrilla position between segments. This was a formal business meeting with contracts and legal language and negotiations that lasted over 4 hours. According to multiple sources who were briefed on what transpired, Triple H opened the meeting by acknowledging that WWE had failed both Roman and Seth at various points in their careers, that creative had sometimes prioritized short-term angles over long-term character development, and that he wanted to make things right by giving them the tools and authority to control their own destinies. Roman's response was reportedly skeptical and confrontational. Roman has been WWE's top star for years and has seen promises from management come and go without meaningful follow-through. Roman said something along the lines of, "I've heard this before. You tell me you're going to protect my character, then 3 months later I'm losing to someone because it's good for business or because someone in corporate thinks we need a title change. If you want me to commit to reforming the Shield, I need guarantees that actually mean something." That demand for concrete guarantees rather than vague promises set the tone for the rest of the negotiation. Seth was reportedly more emotional and vulnerable during the meeting. Seth is still dealing with the psychological fallout from the Vision's betrayal and from relinquishing the World Heavyweight Championship. Seth's position was essentially, "I can't go through this again. I can't invest myself in something only to have it pulled out from under me. If we're doing this, if we're reforming the Shield, I need to know that WWE actually has our backs and isn't just using us for a short-term ratings bump before moving on to the next thing." Seth's vulnerability actually worked in the Shield's favor during negotiations because it made clear that without real protections and guarantees, Seth wasn't going to be able to perform at the level WWE needed him to perform. The terms that were ultimately agreed upon in that meeting are absolutely insane and represent a level of creative control that even WWE's biggest stars historically haven't been granted. I'm going to break down each major point of the agreement based on information leaked from people with direct knowledge of what was discussed, and prepare to be absolutely furious about the preferential treatment the Shield is receiving while other equally talented wrestlers are held to completely different standards. First, Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins have contractual approval over their opponents in feuds. They cannot be put in programs with wrestlers they don't want to work with, and they have the right to suggest alternative opponents if they feel someone WWE is proposing won't result in quality matches or compelling storylines. This is unprecedented. Most WWE wrestlers are told who they're working with and expected to make it work regardless of personal chemistry or creative compatibility. But Roman and Seth now have veto power that essentially lets them pick and choose their competition based on their own preferences and political relationships. Second, the Shield has guaranteed main event positioning for all major premium live events. This means that whether or not Roman or Seth are involved in championship storylines, they will be featured prominently on every big show, typically in the main event slot or the second-to-last match, which is considered almost as prestigious. Other wrestlers can have the matches of their lives, can get over organically with the crowd, can build momentum through weeks or months of strong performances, and none of it matters because the Shield has a contractual guarantee that they get the top spots on major shows regardless of what's actually hot or what fans are most interested in seeing. Third, and this is where it gets really controversial, Roman and Seth have input on Raw's overall creative direction. They're not just controlling their own storylines, they're participating in creative meetings about the entire show and have the ability to advocate for or against certain angles, pushes, or directions that WWE is considering. This essentially makes Roman and Seth unofficial members of the creative team, giving them influence over other wrestlers' careers and opportunities in ways that create massive conflict of interest situations. If Roman or Seth don't like someone or don't want someone getting pushed because it might threaten their positioning, they now have the power to subtly undermine that person's opportunities. Fourth, the Shield has protection from losing in ways that make them look weak or foolish. WWE cannot book them to be embarrassed, to lose decisively in clean finishes to wrestlers WWE hasn't established as being on their level, or to be involved in comedy segments or angles that might damage their credibility as top stars. Again, this is protection that other wrestlers don't receive. Mid-card and even upper mid-card talent are regularly asked to lose clean, to be involved in silly segments, to do jobs that hurt their momentum, all in service of whatever WWE thinks is best for the overall show. But the Shield is insulated from those creative decisions that have buried countless talented wrestlers over the years. Fifth, and this might be the most financially significant aspect, Roman and Seth received substantial raises and bonus structures tied to their Shield reunion. We're talking about compensation that puts them in the top tier of WWE earners, potentially making them among the 5 highest paid wrestlers in the entire company. This is in addition to their existing downside guarantees and merchandise royalties. WWE is investing millions of dollars into ensuring Roman and Seth are financially motivated to make the Shield reunion successful, which makes sense from a business perspective but creates resentment among wrestlers who are working just as hard and delivering quality performances but making a fraction of what Roman and Seth are earning. The reaction within WWE's locker room to these terms being granted to Roman and Seth has been reportedly explosive and divisive. There's a faction of wrestlers, mostly veterans who have been with WWE for years and understand the political realities of the business, who accept that Roman and Seth have earned these privileges through their years of service and their proven ability to draw money and ratings. These wrestlers see the Shield alliance with Triple H as just smart business, the way the wrestling industry has always worked, where top stars get preferential treatment and everyone else has to prove themselves worthy of moving up the ladder. But there's another faction of wrestlers, primarily younger talent and people who have been brought in from the independent scene or from other promotions, who are absolutely furious about this two-tiered system. These wrestlers feel like they're being told that no matter how good they are, no matter how hard they work, no matter how much the audience responds to them, they'll never have the same opportunities or protections that the Shield receives. They feel like WWE is creating an artificial ceiling where Roman and Seth will always be positioned above them regardless of merit or performance, and that's incredibly demoralizing for people who came to WWE believing it was a meritocracy where talent and hard work get rewarded. The Vision, ironically, are reportedly among the wrestlers most frustrated by this development. They just executed a brilliant heel turn that generated massive attention and emotional investment from the audience. They've been getting strong crowd reactions and having good matches. By all traditional metrics, they should be positioned as major threats and given opportunities to cement their status as a top faction. But with the Shield now having contractual protections and creative control, the Vision has to worry that Roman and Seth might use their influence to ensure the Vision doesn't get pushed too strongly because it might make the Shield look less dominant by comparison. Drew McIntyre is another wrestler reportedly very unhappy about the Shield alliance. Drew has been on an absolute tear recently, working a compelling character and having great matches with everyone he's paired with. Drew was positioning himself for a potential World Heavyweight Championship run and mainstream recognition as one of WWE's top stars. But now with Seth back in the Shield and Roman involved in Raw's creative direction, Drew has to wonder if his opportunities are going to be limited because the Shield wants to keep the spotlight on themselves. Drew has experience being depushed in WWE before, and he's reportedly concerned that history is about to repeat itself. Younger wrestlers like Braun Breaker, Carmelo Hayes, and others who are starting to get meaningful television time and build momentum are reportedly worried that the Shield reunion is going to suck all the oxygen out of Raw and leave everyone else fighting for scraps. When a faction is popular and protected as the Shield dominates the main event scene, it becomes very difficult for other wrestlers to break through and establish themselves as stars worthy of fan investment and attention. The concern is that Raw becomes the Shield show where everyone else is just supporting cast members rather than important characters with their own arcs and importance. The women's division on Raw is particularly concerned because WWE has a long history of neglecting women's storylines when they're hyper-focused on male faction warfare. With Triple H's attention and creative energy being devoted to making the Shield reunion successful, there's legitimate worry that women's matches will be moved to the middle of the show or given less time and production resources. WWE has made progress on treating women's wrestling as equally important to men's wrestling in recent years, but that progress can easily be reversed if management decides that the Shield and their feuds are the only things that really matter. Let's talk about what Triple H actually gets out of this deal, because it's not like he's doing Roman and Seth favors out of pure generosity. Triple H is making a calculated business decision that he believes will increase Raw's ratings, drive merchandise sales, generate mainstream media attention, and potentially bring lapsed fans back to WWE programming. The Shield is one of the most iconic factions in WWE history with proven drawing power. By bringing them back and giving them the tools and protection to succeed, Triple H is betting that the increased revenue and attention will far exceed the cost of the preferential treatment and guaranteed pushes he's providing. Triple H is also protecting his own legacy and position within WWE's corporate structure. Triple H was elevated to Chief Content Officer after Vince McMahon's departure, and while Triple H has generally received positive reviews for his creative direction, he's still operating under scrutiny from WWE's board of directors and stockholders who care primarily about ratings and revenue. If Raw's numbers continue declining, if WWE's popularity starts to wane, Triple H's position could be at risk. By making a major move like reforming the Shield and giving them unprecedented support, Triple H is making a bold statement that he knows how to create compelling television and draw audiences, even if it requires breaking from traditional WWE power structures. The creative direction that was discussed in the meeting gives us insight into where WWE is planning to take the Shield storyline over the coming months. According to sources, the immediate goal is to position Roman and Seth as a dominant team that destroys the Vision in revenge for Seth's betrayal and humiliation. This serves multiple purposes. It gives Seth a redemption arc where he overcomes the psychological damage from the betrayal, it establishes the Shield as an unstoppable force, and it potentially sets up the Vision as sympathetic underdogs who fight valiantly but ultimately fall to the overwhelming power of the reunited Shield. The long-term plan apparently involves bringing in Jon Moxley to complete the Shield reunion, though that's dependent on Moxley's availability and willingness to return to WWE. If Moxley does come back, the plan is to have all three original Shield members together for a run culminating in a WrestleMania moment where they stand together as champions, either with Roman holding the undisputed WWE Championship, Seth reclaiming the World Heavyweight Championship, and potentially winning the Tag Team Championships as well. That visual of the Shield holding all the gold simultaneously would be iconic and would certainly generate massive interest, but it would also mean that three championship positions are locked up by one faction, limiting opportunities for everyone else on the roster. The discussion in the meeting also touched on potential opponents and feuds for the Shield beyond just the Vision. The Judgment Day faction was mentioned as a natural rival group that could create compelling multi-person matches and storylines. The Bloodline under Solo Sikoa's leadership could provide an interesting family civil war angle where Roman's new Shield battles his former Bloodline, exploring themes of chosen family versus blood family. And there was discussion about creating new factions specifically to challenge the Shield, building fresh groups of wrestlers who could be elevated through their association with feuding against Roman and Seth. But here's what's really concerning about the creative plans discussed in that meeting: almost all of it revolves around the Shield as the central focus, with everyone and everything else on Raw being defined by their relationship to the Shield. You're either with the Shield, against the Shield, or irrelevant because you're not involved with the Shield at all. That kind of narrow creative focus might generate short-term interest and ratings bumps, but it's ultimately unsustainable because it prevents WWE from creating new stars and fresh storylines that can carry the company forward when the Shield inevitably breaks up again or when Roman and Seth transition to reduced schedules. The part of the meeting that has generated the most controversy and anger from other wrestlers is when Triple H allegedly told Roman and Seth that he trusts their judgment on what's best for Raw more than he trusts his own creative team's judgment. That statement, if accurately reported, is absolutely devastating to WWE's writers and producers who have been working hard to develop storylines and create compelling television. It essentially tells them that their ideas and efforts don't matter as much as whatever Roman and Seth want to do, that they're just there to execute the Shield's vision rather than contributing their own creative input. Paul Heyman's role in facilitating this alliance and in shaping the terms of the agreement cannot be overstated. Heyman is both Roman's on-screen wiseman and a backstage advisor who has decades of experience negotiating with wrestling promoters and understanding power dynamics. Heyman was apparently present at the meeting with Triple H and served as an advocate for Roman and Seth, helping them articulate what they needed from WWE and ensuring the terms were favorable. Heyman's involvement guarantees that Roman and Seth aren't going to be taken advantage of or manipulated, but it also means WWE is essentially negotiating with one of the shrewdest minds in wrestling history who knows exactly how to extract maximum value and protections for his clients. The legal language in the contracts that were drawn up following this meeting is reportedly very specific and binding. This isn't a handshake deal or a verbal promise that WWE can weasel out of if they change their minds later. These are enforceable contractual terms that give Roman and Seth actual legal recourse if WWE violates the spirit or letter of their agreement. WWE's legal team spent significant time making sure the contracts were airtight because they know that if word gets out that WWE isn't honoring its commitments to the Shield, it would damage WWE's reputation and make it harder to negotiate with other top stars in the future. The financial investment WWE is making in this Shield alliance extends beyond just Roman and Seth's salaries. WWE is committing significant marketing and promotional resources to hyping the Shield reunion as a major event. There will be documentary content about the Shield's history and their reunion. There will be expanded merchandise lines featuring new Shield logos and designs. There will be media appearances and interviews where Roman and Seth discuss what the reunion means to them and to WWE. WWE is basically treating the Shield reunion as a major brand launch that requires comprehensive support across all their platforms and partnerships. The comparison to how WCW handled the NWO is inevitable because both situations involve a dominant faction being given tremendous creative latitude and protection at the expense of the overall roster depth. The NWO was incredibly successful initially and helped WCW compete with WWE during the Monday Night Wars, but eventually the faction became bloated and overexposed. The constant focus on NWO storylines prevented other wrestlers from breaking through, and WCW's failure to create new stars outside the NWO ecosystem contributed to the company's eventual collapse. WWE needs to learn from that cautionary tale and ensure the Shield reunion doesn't make the same mistakes. The pressure on Roman and Seth to deliver ratings and business success under this new alliance is enormous. They've been given everything they asked for: creative control, financial security, main event positioning, protection from bad booking. Now they need to prove that Triple H's faith and investment in them was justified. If Raw's ratings don't improve, if merchandise sales don't increase, if fan interest remains stagnant despite the Shield reunion, then Roman and Seth will have failed to deliver on their end of the bargain. That's tremendous pressure that could actually hurt their performances if they're constantly worried about meeting business expectations rather than just focusing on their characters and storytelling. The reaction from WWE's board of directors and stockholders to the Shield alliance has been reportedly positive, which tells you everything about how WWE's priorities and decision-making processes work. The board doesn't care about fairness to the roster or creating opportunities for younger talent or maintaining a healthy creative ecosystem. The board cares about ratings, revenue, stock price, and market perception. If reforming the Shield and giving them unprecedented power accomplishes those business objectives, then the board will enthusiastically support Triple H's decision regardless of how it affects anyone else in the company. The long-term implications of the Shield alliance for WWE's culture and power structures are concerning. If Roman and Seth successfully leverage their creative control and protections to maintain their positions at the top of Raw for years, other top stars are going to demand similar deals when their contracts come up for renewal. WWE will either have to grant those demands and create a system where multiple wrestlers have overlapping creative control, creating inevitable conflicts, or WWE will have to admit that the Shield deal was unique and unprecedented and other wrestlers aren't going to receive the same treatment, which creates resentment and a clear two-tier system within the company. There's also the question of what happens when the inevitable creative disagreements occur between Triple H and the Shield. Creative control sounds great in theory, but in practice it means navigating conflicts when what Roman and Seth want to do contradicts what Triple H or other creative team members believe is best for the overall show. The contract gives Roman and Seth significant power, but Triple H is still ultimately in charge of Raw's creative direction. How those competing interests are balanced and resolved will determine whether this alliance actually functions smoothly or becomes a source of constant backstage tension. The parallels to how Hulk Hogan wielded creative control in WCW and how that eventually became destructive are impossible to ignore. Hogan famously had creative control clauses in his WCW contracts that let him veto storylines, protect his character, and ensure he remained positioned at the top of the card. That creative control allowed Hogan to prevent younger talent from being elevated, to avoid losing cleanly to potential new stars, and to prioritize his own positioning over what was best for WCW's overall health. WWE is now giving similar creative control to Roman and Seth, and while they're more politically savvy and business-minded than Hogan was, the structural incentives are the same: protect yourself and your position even if it means limiting others' opportunities. The meeting between Triple H, Roman Reigns, and Seth Rollins represents a watershed moment in WWE's current era. Either this Shield alliance succeeds spectacularly, driving ratings and business to new heights while creating compelling television that satisfies both casual and hardcore fans, or it fails and becomes a cautionary tale about the dangers of giving too much power to a small group of wrestlers at the expense of roster depth and creative diversity. Triple H has made his bet. He's invested significant political capital, financial resources, and creative focus into making the Shield reunion successful. Now we're all going to watch over the coming months to see whether that bet pays off or whether WWE just recreated all the problems that have plagued wrestling promotions throughout history when they relied too heavily on a single actor faction to carry the entire company. The new Shield era has begun, and it's either going to be WWE's salvation or its biggest creative mistake in years. Hashtag Seth apologizes to Roman after betrayal. YouTube script. Seth Rollins just did something that WWE fans never thought they would see, and it's exposing him as either the most humble man in wrestling or the most pathetic. After being brutally betrayed by the Vision on Monday Night Raw, after being left bloodied and broken in the middle of the ring by wrestlers he championed and protected, Seth Rollins went crawling back to Roman Reigns with an apology that was so degrading, so self-deprecating, so absolutely humiliating that even Roman looked uncomfortable. Seth literally got down on one knee, looked up at the tribal chief, and said, "You were right about everything. I was stupid to trust them. I was naive to think I could be a leader. I need you, Roman. I've always needed you." And the wrestling world is divided right now between people who think Seth is showing mature character growth by admitting his mistakes, and people who think Seth just destroyed his entire legacy by groveling to the man who manipulated and controlled him for years. When I show you the full context of this apology, when I reveal what Roman's chilling response was, and when I explain why this moment represents either the beginning of the greatest Shield reunion story ever told or the complete emasculation of Seth Rollins as a character, you're going to have strong opinions. Let me set the stage for this moment because the emotional weight of Seth's apology cannot be understood without knowing the full history between him and Roman. These two men were brothers in the Shield, the most dominant faction of the past decade. They conquered WWE together. They held championships together. They created legendary moments together. But their relationship was always complicated by power dynamics, by Roman being positioned as the leader and the chosen one, by Seth eventually betraying the Shield to pursue his own ambitions and forge his own path. That betrayal, Seth turning on Roman and Dean Ambrose by aligning with the Authority, is still one of the most shocking moments in WWE history and fractured their brotherhood for years. Since that betrayal, Seth and Roman have had an incredibly complex relationship. They've been enemies. They've been reluctant allies. They've been on different brands barely acknowledging each other's existence. Through all of it, there's been this underlying tension about who was right and who was wrong during the Shield breakup. Seth built a career on the narrative that he didn't need Roman or anyone else, that he could be the guy for WWE on his own merit and his own terms. Roman built his tribal chief character on the narrative that he was always the real leader, that Seth and everyone else eventually came crawling back to acknowledge Roman's superiority and dominance. Fast forward to Monday Night Raw, and Seth's entire worldview came crashing down around him when the Vision turned on him. These were wrestlers that Seth personally advocated for, that he used his political capital to get opportunities for, that he mentored and tried to help navigate WWE's difficult political landscape. Seth saw himself in them, young hungry talent trying to prove themselves in a system that doesn't always reward merit or hard work. Seth genuinely cared about their success because he remembered being in their position years ago, remembered how important it was to have someone in your corner who believed in you. The betrayal was vicious and personal. Carmelo Hayes, Wes Lee, Axiom, and Nathan Frazer didn't just turn heel and attack Seth in a standard wrestling beatdown. They cut a promo specifically designed to humiliate him, questioning his motives for helping them, suggesting he was only using them as props for his own storyline, accusing him of being a fake leader who cared more about his legacy than actually helping the next generation. Then they proceeded to beat Seth down with unprotected shots that left him legitimately injured, bloodied, and unconscious in the ring. The imagery of Seth lying broken while the Vision stood over him celebrating was devastating and designed to destroy Seth's credibility as a leader and protector. What happened immediately after Raw went off the air is where this story takes its most controversial turn. According to multiple eyewitnesses backstage, Seth was taken to the medical area to be evaluated for his injuries from the Vision's attack. While medical staff were checking him for concussion symptoms and treating his various cuts and bruises, Roman Reigns walked into the medical room. Remember, Roman wasn't even supposed to be at Raw that night. He's a SmackDown superstar who had no scheduled appearance. But Roman heard about what happened to Seth and flew in specifically to see him. The initial interaction between Roman and Seth in that medical room is what people are talking about in hushed tones throughout the WWE locker room. According to sources who were present, Roman didn't come in angry or sympathetic. He came in with that cold, knowing look that the tribal chief character is famous for. Roman stood at the foot of the medical table where Seth was sitting, arms crossed, and just stared at Seth for what felt like an eternity. The tension was so thick that medical staff reportedly found excuses to leave the room and give them privacy.